Hello. I first thought about writing it, but then I thought again, and this is exactly the kind of video that I thought of doing when I set up this channel. This is uh, a question, an issue of symbolism. And before I get into the subject of this video, I have to tell you two things. First off, this is a chapter of a very hard to read book by René Guénon. The Symbolism of the Cross is not an easy book. If you've never heard of him, I suggest you start at somewhere else. You start reading a book on symbolism, any other book about symbolism, like the Symbols of the Sacred Science, for example, or the Esotericism of Dante, or many others. Uh, this book is part of a set of three books in which he deals with metaphysics in a more theoretical or abstract way. So they are not easy ones to start with. The other books are The Man and His Coming to Be According to the Vedanta and The Multiple States of Being. The second thing I wish to tell you is that by no means what I'm going to say here refutes his central arguments, even the argument of the chapter. But this is an important thing because he derives the symbolism that he wants to talk about from a misguided astronomical viewpoint. He mixes up things here. And I think it's important to point out where he got it wrong, because this is very easy to get wrong if you are not used to think of the cosmos in the traditional model. If you don't have the model of the spheres and of the cosmos in your head, it's very easy to be fooled by the images and the circles and the spheres. So let's start. I'm talking about the chapter 4 of the Symbolism of the Cross, the directions of space. I'm going to read it and comment on it. Just the three first paragraphs and then I'm going to read the last one. He begins it very well because his criticism of certain Western writers, as he said, I don't know which writers he's talking about here. He gives us one example, J.M. Ragon, Rituel du Grade de Rose-Croix, or Ritual of the Grade of the Rosicrucians. But he says Western writers, so plural. He must have been thinking of other authors as well. So let me read it. Certain Western writers with more or less initiatory pretensions have sought to read an exclusively astronomical significance into the cross by saying that it is a, quote, symbol of the cruciform junction that the ecliptic forms with the equator, end quote, and also, quote, an image of the equinoxes, sorry, since the sun successively covers these 2 points in its annual course, End of quote. In fact, if this is so, the reason is, as mentioned above, that astronomical phenomena themselves can form a higher viewpoint, be regarded as symbols, and as such one may find in them, as in everything else, a figuration of universal man. But if these phenomena are symbols, it is clear that they are not the thing symbolized, and that the fact of confusing the two constitutes a reversal of the normal relationships between different orders of reality. When the figure of the cross is perceived in astronomical or other phenomena, it has exactly the same symbolic value as that which we ourselves can trace. This merely proves that true symbolism, far from having been artificially invented by man, is to be found in nature herself, or rather that the whole of nature amounts to no more than a symbol of the transcendent realities. This is exactly true. This is totally correct. But then he follows with something. And I want you to remember what he, his criticism, because it applies to what he does next. Even if we thus restore the correct interpretation of these things, the two sentences just quoted both contain an error. In actual fact, on the other hand, the ecliptic and the equator do not form a cross, for their two planes do not cut at right angles. Yes, this is true. One could argue that there are other kinds of crosses, but it is true. The equator and the ecliptic cut themselves at an angle of around 23 degrees and a half. It's not at a right angle. On the other hand, the two equinoctial points are clearly joined by a straight line, so that here the cross is still less to be seen. Also true, also completely true. But now comes the mistake. What must in reality be considered is, on the one hand, the plane of the equator and the axis joining the poles and perpendicular to that place. Yes, this is very obviously a cross. You have the celestial sphere here, or if you want to think of it in these terms, the terrestrial sphere, the Earth here. The equator cuts it in two equal halves. The equator comes from the celestial sphere, but we can't think of it on Earth. The terrestrial equator, it cuts the Earth in two equal halves. So this plane here is what he's talking about, this cut plane. And the axis that joins, that unites the North and the South Pole, regardless of whether we are talking here about the celestial or the terrestrial poles, it is perpendicular to this plane, by definition. And any line on this plane is perpendicular to the pole. This is the first cross, and yes, he mentions it shortly after. It is a vertical cross, because the poles go north and south, and any line here is perpendicular to that. But he goes on. And on the other hand, the two lines respectively joining the pair of solstitial points and the pair of equinoctial points. Here we have a problem. I'll just finish the sentence. We thus get what might be called, in the first case, the vertical cross, good, And in the second, the horizontal cross. What is the first problem here? That the equinoctial points and the solstitial points are not on the equator. Okay, the solstitial points are, but they are defined by the ecliptic. So the equinoctial points and the solstitial points are on the ecliptic, and the solstitial points are only on the ecliptic by definition. If you don't know what they are, I'm going to explain it now. The solstices are the points in which the equator and the ecliptic cut themselves, they cross themselves. The sun is at the equinox, at one of the equinoxes, when it is at the intersection, it is at one of the intersections of the ecliptic and the equator. The solstices, on the other hand, are the points in which the sun is farther away from the equator. Astrologically, the solstices are the point zero of Aries and the point zero of Libra, and the solstices are the points of zero Cancer and zero Capricorn. So first, these points are not on the equator. That's the first problem. But it's not the greatest problem, because we can, the solstices are also on the equator, and we can project the equinoxes are on the equator, and we can project the solstices onto the equator. And we can do that univocally. There's a point on the equator in which we can identify uniquely with the solstice. Right. So we have the vertical cross formed by the pole and any line on the equator plane, and the cross formed by the equinoxes and the projection of the solstices on the equator. Good. Okay, this is a minor mistake. But he adds something that adds some confusion to it. The combination of the two crosses, which have the same center, so far so good, forms a three-dimensional cross, the branches of which are oriented in the 6 directions of space. These latter correspond to the 6 cardinal points, which, with the center itself, form the septenary. No, it doesn't. He is saying that this cross corresponds to the 6 directions of space: north, south, east, west, above and below. However, it doesn't. The vertical cross is associated with the poles, so it's north, south, and the other directions are on the horizontal plane of the equator. But these 4 points, the 4 equinoxes, the 4 solstices, might be symbolically related again to north, south, east, and west. Or even, if we want to be generous, to east and west, and above and below. If we think of the equinoxes as east and west, and of the solstices as above and below the equator. But This is not a direct property of the cross. This is a symbolic association which is not direct. Why do I say that? Because the poles are north and south, right? But the solstices and the equinoxes do not mark above, they do mark above and below, but they do not mark east and west. To explain that, I must remind you of what we are seeing here. First, picture the Earth as a giant sphere, as a ball. We have north and south, and we have the equator. When the sun is on the equinoxes, it marks the entire equator. It runs around, it seems to run around the Earth. There's no east or west here. When it is on the Cancer point, on the solstice, it does another circle on the Earth, the Tropic of Cancer. When it's in 0 Capricorn, the other solstice, it does the same thing, but on the Tropic of Capricorn. This cross cannot point to any of the 6 directions because it is not static. These points move constantly. The sun being on them or not, they are dragged by the celestial sphere. If you think of it, now I asked you to think of the terrestrial sphere, now I think I am asking you to think of the celestial sphere, the sky, the heavens, thought of as a giant sphere around us. We have the poles, and this sphere turns around it. So there is no fixed direction here, regardless of what or where the sun is. Moreover, if we think of the solstices as pointing in the direction of above and below, the above is mixed up with north and the below is mixed up with south. We would have 2 of these axes in the same general direction, because going in the direction of the solstice for the sun is getting near the North Pole, and going in the direction of the Capricorn solstice for the sun is going in the South Pole direction. Think of the sky as a ball and the sun as an ant moving on its surface. It is here in the solstice, and it moves north and it moves south. But this ball is turning constantly, so it's doing that. And north and south are here. It's going north and it's going south. And the third problem with that is that for any human on earth, these points do not identify with the 6th direction of space ever. For most people on earth, the sun in the solstices or in the equinoxes rise at the same area of the horizon. It rises in the east when it's in the equinoxes. It rises in the middle of the area that it of the interval it rises in the east and sets in the west. When it's near, or it's reaching, or when it's at the Cancer, the zero Cancer point, it rises in that interval in the east, but in the northern part of that interval. And when it is near the Capricorn point, it rises at the southern part of that hemisphere. Imagine you're facing east. This is north, this is south. In the equinoxes, the sun rises here. In the solstices, it rises here or here. It never rises there, there, or there. The North Pole and the South Pole are above and below only for someone standing on the North Pole. But to someone standing on the North Pole, East and West lose meaning. Because exactly on the North Pole, the sun never rises. It doesn't rise in the east. It starts appearing slowly in the sky as a turning thing, and then it disappears. For someone on the equator, north, south, east, and west, and above and below, are very clearly defined, but they don't match these things. Above is the zenith. Below is the nadir. North is north on the horizon. South is south on the horizon. East is east on the horizon. West is west on the horizon. The cross of the six directions of space is derived from the directions of space themselves, from another set of circles. The horizon and the meridian, which are defined by where the person is in relation to the rising of the sun. The horizon and the meridian are always defined by where you are, while the equator and the ecliptic don't change in relation to you, because the equator is defined by the apparent motion of the sky. If you are very modern science-oriented, you have a very modern science-oriented mind. This is the rotation of the Earth. The equator is defined by the rotation of the Earth. And the ecliptic is defined by the yearly apparent motion of the sun on this sphere. Or, if you are really modern-oriented, by the translation of the Earth. So these two motions, regardless of whether you view it according to the traditional model of the cosmos, the general motion of the sky and the annual motion of the sun on the sky, on its sphere, or if you view it in the modern model of the solar system as translation and rotation, it doesn't depend on where you are. So you can symbolically associate the equinoxes with east and west, and the solstices either with north and south or with above and below. but you lose the orthogonality of the axis. You have to really mix things a bit and twinkle and tinker with the axis to get above and below, east, west, north, and south. While if you think of the horizon and the meridian, they are not uh, only directly obvious to your experience, they are naturally orthogonal because the horizon is perpendicular to you, the plane of the horizon always. The zenith and the nadir are by definition above and below you. And where the sun sets and is always west, where the sun rises always east. It's not always exactly west and east, but it's in the general direction. And when the sun culminates between the nadir and close to the nadir, but not on it, you identify north by it, or you can identify north by the midpoint in the horizon between east and west. One of them is north, the other is south. So the cross of the six directions is not related to the equator and the ecliptic. And I'm just going to read the last paragraph of the chapter because he touches this correct interpretation, but then he misses it again. That's the last paragraph. The symbolism of the directions of space will be applied in all that follows, whether from the macrocosmic viewpoint, as in what has gone before, or from the microcosmic. In geometrical terms, the three-dimensional cross forms a system of coordinates to which the whole of space can be referred. Here, space will symbolize the sum total of all possibilities, either of a particular being or of universal existence. This system is formed by three axes, one vertical and two horizontal, which are three perpendicular diameters of an indefinite sphere, and which, even independently of any astronomical considerations, may be regarded as oriented towards the six cardinal points. Exactly, if you think of the cross as I explained now, as I have just explained. In the text of Clement of Alexandria that has been quoted, Clement of Alexandria is quoted right after the part that I have read before. He mentions above, below, east, above, below, right, left, front, and back, which is obviously related to the horizontal, the horizon, and the meridian points, the zenith, the nadir, and east, west, north, and south, not the equator and the ecliptic. So he's touching the right cross here. In the text of Clement of Alexandria that has been quoted, upwards and downwards correspond respectively to the zenith and the nadir, right and left to south and north, forward and backward to east and west. That's exactly what I said. Confirmation of these correspondences may be found in almost all traditions. Yes, it may also be said that the vertical axis is the polar axis. No, not. It can't be symbolically associated with it. Yes, it can. But if you do that, you lose the distinction between north and south and above and below. That is, the fixed line which joins the two poles and about which all things accomplish their rotation. Yes, the rotation is the problem. And the problem is René Guénon, although he's uh, explaining things from the traditional viewpoint, he has modern astronomy in mind. So this model is not complete in his mind. So he doesn't see the problem here. It is therefore the main axis, whereas the two horizontal axes are only secondary and relative. Yes, if you're talking about the zenith and the nadir at one side, and the poles in another sense, yes, but joining them in the six directions in the three-armed cross, it creates a problem, and he doesn't see it here. Of the two latter, the two horizontal poles, the secondary axis, I'm sorry, the north-south axis may be called the solstitial axis, and the other the equinoctial axis. And this brings us back to the astronomical standpoint, by virtue of the correspondence between the cardinal points and the phases of the annual cycle. A complete exposition of this correspondence would take us too far afield and is not of consequence here, though a place may perhaps be found for it in another study. I don't think he ever did it, although I translated the Symbols of the Sacred Science. Now I cannot remember if he did it. I'll have to read it again. Maybe he did it and I don't remember. But although there is some symbolic correspondence there, he doesn't see the flaw in mistaking the two sets of circles. And it's a pity, because if he thought about the horizon and the meridian, about the actual zenith, nadir, east, west, north, and south, it would fit best in what he's trying to explain here, because he did that, the symbolism, the directions of space, shortly after the chapter of the symbolism of the metaphysical symbolism of the cross, and this chapter is right after universal man. And if he had thought of this cross, zenith, nadir, east, west, north, and south, it will fit so much better to what he is trying to explain, because this cross is at the same time totally specific to the individual themselves, because it is defined just by the position the individual is. So it's the real man, the real human man in this degree of existence, and it implies the center is the man, but it divides and orientates the entire cosmos. My point of view and your point of view and any human being's point of view divides, according to our positions, to where we are at the moment, the cosmos into 4 quadrants. It defines the 6 directions of space for the entire manifestation. And if symbolically we would go to the North Pole to identify zenith with the north and nadir with the south, if we aligned our physical being with the pole, north east, south, west would disappear. East and west won't be defined, and north and south would coincide with zenith and nadir, which would be a perfect symbol for him to explain the, I forgot the term he uses, but the ascension axis and not the expansion axis. So it's a pity, but, and I don't think this inaccuracy or this astronomical mistake produces any flaw in the rest of his argument, but it is strikingly and obviously wrong. So I had to comment it. Sorry, I had to talk about it because it's. I think if you know some astronomy, some astrology, and you think of the cross as he explains, it makes the rest of the chapter more difficult to understand and not easier. So I hope it was informative. I hope it was, in a way, interesting. And if something I explained was not clear, please ask. Please write in the comments below something I didn't explain well or something that was not clear in this video. So see you, and thank you for listening, for watching rather.